just the briefest of dips into Google's AI searches tells us that galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, and here I quote, are all cultural institutions that preserve and share heritage. But they have difference in focuses, Google tells us. Galleries specialize in displaying art for aesthetic appreciation. Libraries house published works for broad access. Archives store unique, non-current records for deep research. And museums collect historical scientific artifacts, for public education. So it might be that we end up thinking that is exactly right, and that AI has done our job for us, or maybe the next couple of hours of conversation will unveil a sense in which the what and the why of each of these sectors is maybe slightly more complicated, slightly different to that. I will come back and introduce the first two speakers, but great pleasure to hand over to Venkat now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken, and thanks everyone for being here. Just a quick note. My name is Venkat. I'm part of the team at the Millie Archives Foundation that's collaborating with Ken and the museum in Copenhagen. The foundation, for those of you who don't know, is a nonprofit network based in India that's looking at strengthening, nurturing, building archives in whatever capacity it can across this landscape. But as we do this, the conversations that Ken and I have been having over the last year or so almost have been the realization that these worlds of galleries, libraries, archives, and museums tend to sort of speak to each other, speak about each other, are a little bit of the other. And so we started to ask, well, what is this thing anyway? And what might it be like as we go forward? Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We are a fairly large group, so we just request you to keep your mics on mute if you could. You're most welcome to keep the cameras on if you can. If you have questions, we will take questions at the end of each session. You're most welcome to raise the hand, virtual hand, or if you have your camera on, we'll look for you. Or you could type your questions in the chat. And one of the other things that we were hoping as we, if you're not able to stay till the end is, we're hoping that this sparks enough interest that we could actually keep doing something in a similar tone in the months and years ahead in some informal way, just to keep this conversation going across these various cultural entities and users of all of these entities to see how to strengthen all of them and how to make them speak to each other. So with that said, I wanted to just hand it back to Ken for the start of the first session.
Great, thank you very much, Venkat. So yes, with enormous pleasure, I introduce our first speaker. Each of our speakers will speak for about 15 minutes, so 2 sessions, 2 speakers in each, and I will invite each speaker to speak sequentially, and then we've organized it so there's plenty of time then for questions, either specifically aimed at our speakers or general thoughts adding to the conversation. So Deirdre Carasso is the director of the public library system in Utrecht in Holland, which I think comprises about a dozen libraries. She's been there since 2020. And then prior to that has been the director of a museum in Schiedam and has also worked in museums in Rotterdam and the National Archive in The Hague. So has dipped her toes into each of our sectors and feels like a perfect person to start the conversation with. So over to you, Deirdre. Thank you.
Thank you. We just rehearsed this, so it should work. Yeah, it does. Hi. Does it work? Yeah.
Perfect.
You can see the presentation. Great. Hi, nice to meet you all. Thanks for inviting me to speak. I am, well, first I'll show this poster. It's on the left. It's when you enter the libraries in Utrecht, it says, in English, it says, come inside to better understand the outside. But I'm going to talk about something else. And now it's not working. Yeah, next. Artists have been drawing inspiration from archives for centuries. For quite some time now, I have been keeping a folder with reproductions of artworks inspired by archives. For example, this artwork by Cornelis Gijsbrechts, who painted a trompe-l'œil of archival papers in the 17th century. Or this is a terrible picture, I couldn't find a better one, but it's an installation by Sophie Calle, a French artist. When a boyfriend broke up with her by email, the French artist Sophie Calle asked 107 women to read the letter and analyze it according to their professional expertise. It was set to music, performed by an actress, and examined by a forensic psychiatrist, among others. And the resulting artwork, Take Care of Yourself, after the boyfriend's parting words, filled the French pavilion at the Biennale in Venice, as well as, you can see here, the National Library in Paris. And I am a fan of the Dutch photographer Jan Banning. And this is a photograph from the series Bureaucratics, a comparative photographic study of the culture, rituals, and symbols of state civil administrations and their servants in 8 countries on 5 continents. Writers are inspired by libraries. More than that, there currently is a trend for feel-good novels set in bookshops and libraries. It's impossible to keep up. Museums and their art collections also spark the imagination of writers. Take, for example, The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which revolves around a painting by Caro Fabricius, or The Museum of Innocence by the Turkish writer Orhan Pamuk. And this is particularly special, I don't know if some of you have visited, because while writing the novel, the author simultaneously built a story in the form of a real museum, which can still be visited in Istanbul. It displays everyday objects that document the obsessive love between the 2 main characters in the book. But do museums, archives, and libraries also truly inspire one another in a creative way, such as Orhan Pamuk? Do they really collaborate? Although artists and writers cross the boundaries between museums, libraries, and archives with ease, my bold proposition is that the walls between these institutions themselves have hardly been dismantled. My name is Deirdre Carasso, and I was already introduced, but I am director of the Public Library in Utrecht in the Netherlands. And this library is housed in a former post office. It looks a little bit like a cathedral, but it was a post office. And it has an artwork on the front porch by Maarten Baars hanging above the entrance. And before I started working in this library 5 years ago, I worked for a long time at Museum Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam, an art museum, and I was director of the Municipality Museum of Schiedam. And that is a medium-sized art museum just outside of Rotterdam. And the common denominator between this municipal museum and the library I work at the moment is that we both work closely with the people in our community. And this is a small sidestep, but I can't resist mentioning it, even though it has not so much to do with today's topic, but I'm still really happy about it. Last weekend in the library, we opened a new wing, and it is called the Book Spectacle. And it is a place for unpublished books. And thousands of writers already brought their novel, poetry, comic, or cookbook to the library. And we promise every writer a reader. And to that end, we built a playful installation in which all books are equally presented in bags, as you can see on the pictures. And you are tempted to choose one. It's like a blind date with a book. But I'm not only trained as an art historian, but also as a librarian, but also as an archivist. Before I worked in art museums, I worked at the National Archives in The Hague. This is where all government archives are kept, as well as a magnificent map and photo collection. And at one point, we created an interactive high-tech exhibition there with all the masterpieces of the National Archives and the Royal Library. And this is a brief overview of my career in archives, museums, and a library. And it also tells you that I am aware that in this international company, I speak from a limited perspective, a Western one. And when I speak of libraries, I mean public libraries. And when I speak of museums, I mainly think of art museums. And for today, I've prepared a few short observations that I hope will lead to conversation, new ideas, and mostly collaborations. Because I think we hardly ever truly collaborate. And when I moved from archives to museums and from museums to library, every time I kept thinking, they are not that different. After all, we all have a collection, we have a public space, and people will visit. And yet there are three entirely different worlds. And the invitation for today states that they increasingly do a bit of what the others do. And I'll quote from the invitation: museums have long had public-facing exhibition galleries, and now archives and libraries do too. And libraries have special archival collections, and museums and galleries have libraries. End of quote. And that is indeed true. I can name quite a few examples of that, and I'm sure you can do too. But does it mean that collections truly reinforce each other, that the different institutions collaborate at a fundamental level, that they really make use of each other's expertise? And to be honest, in my view, this happens far too little. And the only example I can think of where museological, library, and archival knowledge are truly interwoven and reinforce one another is the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision in Hilversum. And this institution manages the Dutch media archives, but also creates with it museums and programs for libraries. And it is a shame that we do not collaborate more, because all three possess specific expertise. Ken already mentioned it a little bit in his introduction, that could make very good use of from one another. Museums are strong at presentation, thinking big and attracting attention. Libraries are more modest, but they are the most accessible, welcome very diverse audiences, and excel at the human scale and the dialogue. And archives have become really strong over the past 25 years in digitalization and digital access. And to have a greater impact, you need all of these competences. One of the reasons we learn too little from one another, in my view, is the unspoken institutional hierarchy between the three types of organizations. And when I moved from an archive to a museum, this was seen by many people as a significant promotion. Archives generally, at least in the Netherlands, enjoy less prestige. They are seen as bureaucratic and dusty. And when I moved from an art museum to a public library, that was considered a demotion. One person texted me, "Congratulations, libraries are the Red Cross of knowledge," but most people raised their eyebrows. They were still under the impression that public libraries, due to digitalization and declining reading, were nearing the end of their existence. And hey, you buy your books, you don't borrow them. A well-filled bookcase is a status symbol. By now, that image has shifted considerably. Libraries in the Netherlands are currently highly valued, but 5 years ago it was different. But still, I rarely receive colleagues from archives or museums who come to have a look and learn something at a public library. And the reverse does not happen often either. So let go of the misplaced and pointless ideas about status and see what you can learn from each other. So where do the opportunities lie? Today I will mention two challenges of our time that offer opportunities for libraries, archives, and museums to collaborate more and learn from each other. They are not fully developed, these notions. There was not enough time for them, but hopefully they will feed our discussion. The first, AI is advancing rapidly. I will refrain here from reflections on generative AI, super AI, and more. But what is clear that the distinction between real content and AI-generated content is becoming blurred. This confronts us with a whole range of questions that we will each have to answer from our own disciplines, but from which we can learn from each other. What is authenticity actually? Do we make our sources available to our commercial data models, and so on? In addition, we can work together to articulate and highlight the importance of authentic sources. AI creates a vast data pool without our being able to determine to what extent what is offered is reliable. The abundance of unmanageable data and the way it is presented to us puts us in the paradoxical situation of becoming trapped in ever narrower bubbles of circulating information. With our authentic sources in libraries, archives, and museums, and reliable physical and digital spaces, we can provide a counterbalance. Another opportunity to collaborate. Archives are a pillar of our democracy, an indispensable means of holding power to account. Libraries are places where you learn to read and write, become digitally skilled and resilient, all necessary to make your voice heard. They are also places of citizenship where people collectively engage with social issues in their community. At Utrecht Library, for example, we have a House of Active Citizenship, a place that provides facilities and networking to advance civic initiatives on social challenges. And museums can be places of democracy by creating exhibitions that encourage reflection and dialogue about social issues. And many museums today embrace that role. And in a time when democracy is less self-evident than ever, and when even in democracies free space is being restricted, it is therefore more important than ever that these three institutions know one each other, learn from each other, strengthen one another, and support one another in this role when they are under threat. So, archives, libraries, and museums each have their own identity and expertise, and we all operate in different cultural, social, and political contexts. But I am convinced that we will all be better off, certainly in light of the challenges we face in the coming years, if we get to know one another better, learn from each other, and where possible, join forces. That's it.
I've slightly forgotten how to clap on Zoom, but
No.
and I see claps floating up across my screen. Thank you so much, Deirdre. What a fantastic, provocative, ideas-full way to start. Great reminder of the cultural significance of the institutions themselves. A plea for real collaboration, maybe around physicality and democracy, particularly questions about overlapping and similar communities, and then this slightly alarming, but I think maybe resonating idea of the hierarchy, and is there a competition? You're encouraging us to say no, 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 but I think you do put your finger on something interesting about that ladder of institutions. So I mention all of that just to remind us that, and hang on to all of that. There is lots and lots to question, to push back, or maybe to embrace from what you've said. But let's think of those questions, hang on to them. And in the meantime, we will move on to Jeebesh Bagchi as our second speaker. And Jeebesh is the co-founder of the Raqs Media Collective and has worked since 1992 on any number of projects that cross all sorts of media, from installation and sculpture to performance, word-based pieces. And has throughout that work, I think, intersected in any number of interesting ways with collections of various sorts across the whole sector. And I think I might be right, Jeebesh, you will correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe you've never worked for any of these institutions. So you are a dancer within them, but maybe not employed to perform within them. But I will be corrected possibly. But I'll hand over to you in any case.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Venkat. Thank you, Deirdre. We have never worked in institutions, but we have been travelers in many institutions. So what I will try to share with you today is a short glimpse of some of the intersections and travels through various institutions, archives, libraries, galleries, and museums. So to give a sense of some of the interesting insights one gets from these places and the way one transforms one's own thinking and practice. This is over a period of a long time. These are some of the framework. It is a walk through some things, and I look at sediments, dispersal, margins, misrecognition, coercions, and excess, by which I tried to organize some of the questions that this invitation posed for me. So we'll start with a short walk that we did over a period of 2 years in Manchester. And Manchester is, as you know, is deeply connected to history in South Asia. So going to Manchester was like visiting a part of your own history in some very convoluted and a torn way. So these are 4 personas that we met over a period of time. They inhabit 4 different landscapes. There is the story of the canals. The canal story was with Ed Gilbert. He took us through the canals, through the factories, through the alleys and streets of Manchester, the 19th century, late 18th and early 20th, whole of the 19th century Manchester. Then there was the Michael Powell, who is Chatham Library. Chatham Library is the oldest library in UK, and it has one of the most amazing collection of books. I will come to it. Then there is Gail Heath, who is the sole custodian of the Pankhurst house, the Pankhurst sister who enraged began the main protagonist of the suffragette movement, and their house now stands sandwiched between a huge car park and a hospital, but it's a kind of saved as a national heritage. She is the sole keeper, and that's also a house where many women gather, and it's a kind of has a soul space in Manchester. And then there is the David Gelsthorpe, who is the mineral keeper of Manchester's history. And what is fascinating is about 300 million years story, Precambrian story. The story is there, fossils and minerals. So this is a museum, an archive, a library, and a city walk. This gave us the structure to understand how to think Manchester, how to work through the history, and also our interconnections. I'll just give you a short kind of a diversion into the Chatham Library. This is one of the oldest library, and this is the bookshelves blocked, and you see these books, and you're intimidated by them. You have to figure out a way of entering it. You figure out a way of how do you speak to this collection, which is 400 years old collection of very many books. And then the librarian, Michael Paul, took us, who is no longer there, but he passed away a few years back. He took us personally through the collections, telling us how. And one of the most riveting thing is that the library retains an older form of narration, where the polite literature is the literature that doesn't offend you, which is now the dominant literature of our time, the social media literature, the polite literature of our time. So that was there and it was nice. But what struck us most was this reading table, and there you can see me trying to figure out a posture for reading, the reading table. And from here, the interesting thing that we found in this library was that this is the library where Marx and Engels starts their inquiry into the history of capital. This is where in summer of 1845, two young men in the early 20s sits in the library, and these are some of the books they start accessing. And what is incredible is that you have those books in the library, and the librarian takes you through those books, and you realize that they are reading a vast story of reports. They're reading on the city of history of London, the other cities, peace and war, large tracts, and they're being written, and also mortality tables. And this is something that suddenly a whole very big edifice of years of production of knowledge suddenly starts making sense, because you somewhere connect it to other histories, the histories that are familiar with you, and the kind of books that you have read and thought the world with. So this was our entry point into Manchester through the library. The streets, canals is one, and through that. And this is the table where the reading of these books were done by Marx and Engels, and it's a beautifully polished table. And so this is the library. So from the library, we move to the museum. Now so library gives you a certain kind of entry point. You have to find your own entry point. The librarian is very crucial to give you that movement into an entry point through the sediment, a deep sediment. But in this Manchester Museum, there was another kind of sediment, which is an excess, a sediment of another kind of an excess. And here is the collection of moths. And this is an incredible, amazing collection of moths they have, thousands, along with minerals and everything. And this moth, what incredible, we found this story of the peppered moth. Now, peppered moth is a moth which had a light color, and it becomes in the industrial world of the 19th century, where there is a lot of soot, it camouflage itself by doing a kind of a melanin evolutionary shift and becoming darker to become part of the soot. And then when the pollution and the soot comes down over the 20th century, the peppered moth becomes again some kind of a little lighter pigmentation. So there is a kind of a melanin pigmentation, kind of a camouflage movement of time, of compressed time that is done in this. So this is our reading of pepper moth. And what we did now from the museum, you take so among the thousands of things, you tease out one story, one kind of an object, which tells you a story back of 200, 300 years. And from there, you kind of come back to the gallery where you are showing a certain kind of interpretation or a thinking of that work, of that investigation, of that travel, of that journey, of that walk in the city. And this is the way, and this structure is a mineral structure also we found through our journey and through the mineral museums, is the cerussite, and it's a very specific structure. But and the paper moth enlightens the cerussite, enlightens the time dimension of our encounter. And so this is where the museum's most, or the gallery, this is the gallery, Whitworth Gallery in Manchester. So our four personality, so who we think are they cannot be replaced. They bring a persona, they bring a story, they bring an existence to this material to keep it alive and burning and for everyone. So we presented them and the interstices of the gallery and the city, which is where people regularly come in large numbers. And this is our work on the side, which is called Lost in Search of Time. So the idea is that you go in search of time and you get lost. But these are the four portraits. So this is the kind of a short story of Manchester. And why I say that where the museum, the library, the personal archive, and the gallery keep on teasing and confusing and teasing and bringing each other into some kind of relationship where, as artists, we sense that, and sometimes we are able to draw in those relationships. This is the second part. This story is from a time book. We encountered a time book in the incredibly beautiful archive called the Rivers of Steel in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, as you know, was one of the biggest steel producers and the Second World War steel. 40% of steel was produced by Pittsburgh. But unfortunately, by 1987, all the factories closed down. So this archive, the River of Steel archive, has a fantastic collection. So this is the time book, and the time book gives you a detailed account of the daily calculation of wages and time. So you see on the right the amount, see the kind of absent, present, and then there was this things that you hear in the industrial setup, the protective goggles, the welders' glasses, and the helmet, and these are all kept properly cataloged. It has a name. You can find the name Dan Hernandez and Met Poransky. You see the world there, and you see how America was shaped, which is now under tatters, but still it is the shaping of America. But then what we found was this incredible object, uncatalogued, unregistered, in the edge of the archive, in one of the shelves, where a dog, kind of figure, and a small little man holding on to it. And it was what we understood from a conversation with the archivist and other people who have donated their collections, is that it was made inside a factory in the off time. So it's a pause time, it's a parenthesis. In the pause time of the work of productivity, this was made. So for us, this became a very, very alive object, because it had a strange subjectivity that was yet not narrated back into the company's history, or history of working class protest, or history of work. It was a space of enjoyment at some level. So what we tried to do is that our robot dog became our friend. It stayed with us for long. It is still there. And this is the robot dog. We called it the robot dog. And this is a newspaper done, who had also passed away last year, Sher Singh, who did this paper for 40 years. Every month there was 4 reporting on stores, on happenings in the industrial area around Delhi. So robot dog becomes our collector. Robot dog becomes our reader. Robot dog invites others to read. So we had each of the episode from 93 to 2014 compressed into a work where the robot dog invites everyone to read the collection. And this is the collection of over 10 million workers having passed through this period of 30 years. It's also the period which Raqs, my group, that was the period of where we were growing and living in this same space and same time. So in this instance, the Pittsburgh factory, a margin, the marginal to the Pittsburgh factory. Earlier, the excess produced the thread of the paper moth. Here, it was the very extreme margin, the uncatalogued, becomes for us a storyteller and something that gives life and breath to our own production, and thinking of other archives or other forms of archival practices, or other urgencies that one can draw this to. Okay, so now the fourth argument that I make is that there are certain times where in the archives you feel you will land up in extreme materials which are built and drawn through massive coercion. So this is the Galton archives in University of London, where you will see it's a massive amount of data, anthropological, anthropometrical data was produced by measuring human beings, prisoners, prostitutes, young Jewish kids, homeless, and people of the and data were received from the people of the colonies. So this is the kind of a space which becomes extremely difficult to engage in. Some of our work has been trying to engage these through lecture performances, through some kind of a narration. But one document I would like to share is this. In the Galton archives, we found we kind of wanted to see this hand. This is the first imprint of a whole hand made in a contract in 1858 in Bengal of a man called Raj Konai, who was a part peasant, part contractor. So this fingerprint was part consensual, part coercion, and it becomes the first kind of fingerprint, and is taken by William Herschel and sent to Galton for analysis. It becomes the kind of a first print, you can say the kind of a forefather of our present fingerprint, where mark by which the identity will be stabilized. So we did the so we found it in 2007, did a lecture performance with it, did a kind of a narration trying to tell the story, and the image behind the black and white is part of that lecture performance. In 2011, made a work where by then India had developed a huge, massive meta infrastructure, which is now Aadhaar, which is world's biggest biometric database of its citizens, and now everything is under dispute. And that we named it Untold because our this hand kept on counting endlessly. So this is where from the Galton archives we could tease out only or some, and it is extremely difficult to work out other material from those archives, though I think we have been trying to think through this.
First public library. What does knowledge taste like? The unsalted white of an egg. It asks for the garnish of betrayal. Prepare yourself. Before setting off, select a passage from a book that is dear to you. Write or print it with elegance, flair, and affection on a quality piece of paper. The question remains how to share the fullness of hunger, that foreboding, that foresight. Select a book at random from the library's shelves. Make sure that it is about something completely unrelated to the contents of the passage you have selected. Insert the paper bearing your selected passage between the pages of this book. Replace the book in its place on the shelf carefully.
So this is a big public art project that we did with the Copenhagen Public Library, the beautiful library, where we invited people to, it was instruction that something that you admire, write, think, and you want it to miscegenate some other forms of knowledge. So you enter a poem in a mathematics book, you enter a literary text in a gardening book. So this was something that was the instruction. The whole idea was, and we called it Robin Hood of Wisdom, is that the miscegenated movement of ideas produce serendipitous connections, a new connection to the world. So this is something where the library is seen as a space where you can actually rebirth a new discussion around the framework of knowledge, because libraries keep knowledge fairly intelligibly classified. So the idea was to bring in a degree of unintelligibility into the movement of ideas, which moves in ways that are not predictable. So that was our movement. And there is another kind of movement that this is what we have tried to do in museum and gallery. So the museum is we found in the People History Museum a communard biscuit from 1871, burnt biscuit actually. So what we did was we made a 3D scan and made the biscuit again, and this time eatable, and shared it with the public. So as a biscuit that they can take, mostly people took it as an artwork. They didn't eat. But the idea was that you can through a form of transformation enact a way in which you can taste the historical material, or you taste time, in that way. The other one was this Pamphilos, this cup, which was 2000 years old. This is the facsimile. It's a broken cup, 2000 years old in Arnika shipwreck in island of Greece. We found this cup, and what was fascinating for us that the word Pamphilos means friends of all. Now, whether the name of the person bearing the cup was friends of all, or the friends of all was an aspiration that got shipwrecked, we don't know. But what we know is that we can create facsimiles of the friends of all and share with everyone, and to drink wine or some water, wine, together, with the idea that the friends of all didn't die with the shipwreck, but actually can keep on coming back again and again. One short little interlude is this: in the Galton archives, we had this. We found this head, which is the head, and it was one of those uncatalogued. But the story goes that this is the head. Is uncatalogued, kept there, but it could be a confusion is that whether it is the head of a scientist or head of a criminal is not yet certain, because it came from kind of two different kind of journeys. So we find this head always perplexingly challenging, because in an archive you find these objects which have inbuilt deep ambiguity, and almost as a kind of allegorical story of our own time continuously relaying us. So I come back to this image. The image we have been playing with the idea that our movement in the world, how do we show it, and in this archive, museum, gallery, library journey. So what we think is that the sensibility that guides us or makes us understand these movements, we call it the deltaic. In a way, the deltaic is something that you step into the world, and there are multiple tributaries and movements that you are part of, joining in and joining out. And some are submerged, some goes away, some are buried, some appear suddenly. But there is a continuous movement, and the movement is with sediments and dispersals, has its excess and floodings, but also there are deep misrecognitions, coercions. So that's the experience of moving through this landscape of this four. Now the question is how far one takes this journey through this four very crucial institutional spaces. Thank you.
We need another round of visual and audio applause. Thank you so much, Jeebesh.
Yeah.
And yes, a wonderful reminder of the role and significance of art practice, I guess mostly brought maybe from outside institutions in terms of interrogating collections. I kept on writing down so many potent phrases you shared with us. I loved your sediment of excess, this idea of teasing out one story amongst them. And then I think at one point you encouraged us to think about the taste of knowledge and the taste of time. So yeah, wonderful food for thought. I've been looking at the number of participants. We're almost at 100 people. I keep on hoping 4 more would join us so that we can reach the round number of 100. But this is a lot of people. But please don't be backward in coming forward. So I will carry on scanning across my screen. If I don't see you when there's a pause, jump in. But I'm sure that Deirdre and Jeebesh would be very happy to respond to questions and comments and suggestions, either about this role of art in intersecting with these four institutions, or indeed coming back to Deirdre's points about integrating, collaborating, bringing down some of the walls maybe that seem to separate them. And I will pause there. There's always a moment. Right, we have a comment appeal. Yes, so yeah, as Venkat is saying, just raise your hands and we will respond. And maybe while you're gathering your thoughts, I might come back to Deirdre to just ask you to share a bit more about this idea of collaborating across these institutions. It occurs to me that there are various ways of doing that. In a very simple sense, they're all about people, places, and things. So is it, do you think, more important to get the people to collaborate, either the people who work there or the communities that go to these separate places? Is it more important that we focus on the spaces and get, maybe people who are used to going to one of them to go to others instead? Or do you see it more as a matter of taking stuff that's kept in one type of place and seeing what it looks like when we bring it to another type of space? Or indeed, have I got it completely wrong and there's another even better way of collaborating?
I never believed that there is one answer to that, because the place you're creating depends on the context where it's set. So it could be collaborating between people. I think we can learn a lot from each other. For example, I showed the book Spectacle, which is for public libraries a little bit strange because it's almost an art installation. But what I took from museums is the experience how to present a collection and how to seduce people. And we also made a lot of noise around it, which is not very common for a public library. So sometimes it's, I think, people collaborating, learning from each other. But I am still waiting for also, I would love to visit museum / archive / library, which is really integrated, because you often see a public library with an exhibition space, but it's not really connected. So what Jeebesh described from an artist's point of view, how could we, I don't have the answer, but maybe I would love to learn from the people attending this meeting if they know other examples. I named one in the Netherlands, but it was really the only one I could think of. So I hope there are more places like that I can visit to get inspired, but I don't see it often.
Actually, as artists, no, we don't, in our mind, the differentiation is less. It is basically a certain kind of a route map that appears with somebody taking you through, or a question that somebody poses, or a material that somebody says is there, and and a conversation that leads to something. So in a way, this is a very permeable space for us from outside. Sometimes there are very strong gatekeeping rules. Sometimes it's incredibly difficult to negotiate the archival material to even see. But that is after the curiosity has been alerted. So you move through it. So in a way that it is like for us, a space would be permeable to understand its growth, its movement, its density, its past, or it's the envelope of the present, how far and how big the present is of that space, is through the encounter with this institutions. But from within the institution, I'm sure they have their hard rules, and they're very suspicious of artists. So the hard rules are there. But
I was going to ask you, Jeebesh, actually, because you're in your generous presentation, you show that you've worked, I think, in all the different institutions we're talking about. And you've just flagged the sense in which there are necessary rules, I guess, but also rules that can sometimes feel as though they're not allowing people in. It would just be interesting to get your reflections on having broken into these places. I don't mean that in a serious way, but just your reflections on maybe the differences between these type of institutions and how do you work with institutions that survive by keeping material safe and therefore largely out of people's hands, I suppose might be one way of thinking about it.
I think a degree of fragility, the idea of fragility or the sensibility of fragility that a institution produces for itself, of its material and of its holdings. Sometimes it is very difficult to see it. But as person, when I go to an archaeological museum, my footsteps and my way of seeing, my asking question, my way of even the order of touching changes than when I go to say a library. So the librarian in Chatham was able to show us a 600-year-old book with a degree of ease, but I remember when go to Chester Beatty Library to see a Mughal miniature, we had to see it from distance because they cannot be touched. So the fragility and touch plays a role, and I think as artistic method is you think these questions. You think the question of the relationship between what is out of use, what is in use, and how do you bring, like one of the reasons that we did the Communard biscuits and facsimile 3D scans and kind of an imaginative 3D scan of Pamphilos was that you can't easily touch it or access it. So you do a technological mediation, and then you transform it with other matter. So make it a biscuit out of it or something out of it. But this question of mediation and touching is very crucial to the way institution produces their holding in public imagination. I know some places it is incredibly difficult to even negotiate. Some places it's a general, but that's why that you said in the beginning of AI. I always think that it is the people who are there, who are keeping the holding, the conversation with them actually unravels an holding, unravels a library, I worked for 10, 15 years we created an institution which was nested in another institution which had a library. Our best friends were the librarian because they would have stories about collections. Some scholars' collection in the library and how this collection came to shape. So they tell you, make the library personal for you. And I think that's the very crucial thing that a lot of people in this institution do. They are able to bring in a subjectivity to a material, otherwise you're desperately trying to make sense of.
Ken, you're on mute.
Thank you. Rookie error. I can see Panisha, you've got a question, so we'll come to you right in a second. But I've also just spotted in the written chat there's a question for Deirdre here, which I might read, and maybe you've seen it too, Deirdre. So it says, Deirdre, did you? And this is from somebody, Jaya, maybe at Millie Archives. Did you ever feel the collaborations are difficult because of the mental compartmentalization among the different professions, which in a way helps the non-professionals heading many of the institutions? So it's about the sort of, I guess, the different mentalities in these different institutions, if I'm understanding this correctly, and whether that gets in the way of collaboration. And then we'll come straight to you next, Panisha.
I don't know if I understand the question correctly. but they're different kind of people. Librarian and archivists are a little bit alike, but museum people are different. Um, and but we also share a lot. So I don't know the last part of the question, which in a way helps the non-professionals heading many of the institutions. So I don't know.
Well, maybe just say, because you've worked in all four,
Yeah.
how would you caricature the differences that you found in terms of these different callings, I wonder?
I think librarians are they're modest, and they're people orientated. Now I'm talking about public libraries, which is different than, for example, university libraries or scientific libraries. But archivists are the most structured ones, I think. And museum professionals are the most creative ones, but also the most bold ones. They have a big mouth. Could be a plus. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not.
Okay.
But and they're trained differently in different institutions, at least in the Netherlands. So so they don't meet actually.
Okay.
And not when
Yeah,
they're young and when they're students, they're on different tracks.
Yes, yeah. So you're hinting at, and I'm just I'll capture that and then see if anyone else wants to respond, and in the meantime we'll come to Panisha. But your sense then is there might be different character types, but also there's rather different training, and maybe that takes people that might have differences and conceivably might push them away.
Yeah, but what I
people
said is we share a lot of challenges in the next couple of years, so we can really pull together. I think it's necessary in many countries. And I also put in the chat, I thought of one great example I didn't put in my presentation. It is in Luma, Arles. Luma is a museum, and it's in Arles in the south of France. And if you go to the 5th floor, there is a project. It's a library, and it's called The Library is on Fire. And it is a library, but it also has records, books, artifacts, and it's curated in an artist way, in an artistic way. So you move through this library by.
बंद हो गया वहां पे बंद हो गया क्या?
Oh, I think Deirdre just cut out for me, maybe for other people.
Yeah.
Oh, you're back with us. Okay, we're going to move on. Panisha, you've been waiting patiently, so we will come to you, and then I've just also noticed a couple of more comments that have come up in the chat, which I will read out and share for everybody. But Panisha, please tell us what's on your mind.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Deirdre and Jeebesh. And my question, well, it's a comment, I'm trying to formulate it, but this is coming from, I've trained as a historian, and therefore I'm used to the archives use of archives in a certain way. I'm enormously moved by what Jeebesh you described as the deltaic movement. And I think that might be how thought moves in the world anyway, except that, as a historian trained to do research of a certain kind in the archive, like always under the threat of historicism, you're sort of always afraid that you'll be subsumed by what you call the kind of very grid-like logic of the racks and the shelves, and so you're kind of straining against that, and straining against reproducing that movement. And I'm reminded of something Michel Desserteau says about breakage being the postulate of interpretation. And as I understood it, so the familiar spaces for me are the archive, the museum, and the library, but I think the gallery kind of breaks it open in a way that it becomes the space for a kind of public incitement of desire, having rooted desire through all these other sort of spaces, and reintroducing that element, whether it's through excess or it's through lack of unintelligibility. And I wonder, if Venkat or other archivists here could also speak to it, is that there's always a category in the archive that is miscellaneous, which might have, the robot dog or like these other sort of things that that push and are slightly dangerous to the general sort of containment of the archive, or even to thought, like you don't know what to do with it. So yeah, this is not really a question, but I just wanted to say that it was incredible.
No, interesting ideas. So I guess partly do galleries, is that a space of opportunity in terms of mixing things up, I guess is maybe what you're hinting at, and also this idea of objects that don't fit being, maybe particularly provocative and interesting, but other interesting ideas there too. Deirdre and Jeebesh, would you like to respond to that?
No, in a sense that I really like the way you bring the, in a sense that the galleries are basically highly, in a way, contaminated spaces, spaces that can contaminate knowledge and also bring in the contaminated and play around with it, because it doesn't need to, it produces its own rules. The thing with artists that it produces its own threshold and its own rules to play and draw from. So in a sense that it is not a discipline, and that's why you can be indisciplined, undisciplined, and play around. So in that sense, it is a very unstable space also, compared to, say, an archive or a museum or even a library. But in moments of like we know in moments of great upsurge, like in India 5-6 years back, the biggest attack by police was on a library, and the Jamia library. They attacked and brutally assaulted the students and the collection. The reason is that the library sometimes is the site of that parenthesis of time, which is where you actually take yourself away from a time that is in order, though you would think that library is where you gain knowledge and you are basically put to use in the society or production. But the way it was attacked, it was very clear that the parenthesis could be a very threatening parenthesis. You don't know who is sitting where. So the gallery shares sometimes that sense of that kind of miscellaneous movement of life in the parenthesis.
I suppose also, sorry to cost you, Jeebesh, but I mean, the nomenclature can be differently used in different places, but sometimes galleries, the Kunsthalle type galleries, is a place without collections. And therefore it can be the place where other collections come, and therefore there's a kind of, there's great richness, as both of you have pointed to, from places that hold on to things, but also, fantastic liberation from places that don't have collections too. I'm going to turn now, because we've got a series of comments and indeed questions in the chat. So can people hear me? I went cold for a moment, but I think...
Yeah, you did. Yeah. And now you are again.
I'll just step in for a moment, and maybe if I could just call on Alice, because Alice, I don't know if just sort of maybe summarize your comment, but if you're able to speak, it'll be great. And this is largely about the sense of there is a deep profession, there's deep expertise that you bring up in your comment, which is at a loss due to funding cuts in different parts of the world. And this is directly connects to what Jeebesh was also talking about the importance of, in a sense, I guess, library as being an entry point to what Jeebesh so beautifully called the sediment. So I'm curious, because for me, it connects back to something that Deirdre brought up earlier about how the space is an active space for getting different kind of people together as a space to activate democracy. So I don't know if we can just connect these thoughts, if between the three of you, to reflect a little bit upon the custodians of these spaces and their roles in either bridging the gaps or actually finding ways in connecting with the people or connecting with each other. Is that something that you could reflect upon? I think, Deirdre, you briefly highlighted, perhaps in a lighter tone earlier about the hierarchies of these professions as well. So I'm just sort of in a stream of consciousness and trying to connect the dots here a little bit. But Alice.
I'll just say briefly what I was thinking about, which was the State Library here in Melbourne, in Victoria, Australia, is a much loved institution and has actually become a big tourist draw card in recent years. So it's fuller than ever, but what we're seeing is cuts being made to the reference staff who know the collection deeply, and where many of us who are regular library users and who use it not only for books but for the personal papers it holds and other collections are really worried that that intimate knowledge of the collection will be lost. And it's not something that can be easily gained just from perusing the catalogue, because as many of you will know, quite often things are in collections that haven't made it to the catalogue, or if they're in the catalogue, it's not clear, it's not easy to work out what's behind them. So I guess there's been a bit of a battle lately arguing for the importance of keeping these reference librarians, and that has brought a lot of people who use the library in different ways, from writers to artists to historians. You know, all sorts of people have come together in a campaign which has had some success and has had quite a bit of media coverage here in Australia. But we all fear that, you know, this is a temporary victory, and that it will be a long fight to keep these valuable staff members there with their knowledge. And I'm assuming that this is not an uncommon experience. And I guess it just raises a question about, that expertise and knowledge that builds up over a period of time and can't be quickly acquired. And how do we protect that? Thinking about all of these other possibilities and things that we can do with the material that's in these institutions and collections. So any insight into, you know, strategies as well would be welcome.
Deirdre or Jeebesh, would you want to take a shot at that?
You know,
It's a very important question, but it's a little bit maybe of a different question. Of course, we need all this knowledge also to collaborate, but I don't feel competent to give a question, to give an answer how to solve this question in Melbourne. Sounds like this campaign is a good idea. I mean, it's very important that people realize where you need this knowledge, reference knowledge for these reference librarians. So but from this discussion point of view, it's really difficult for me to. I'm sorry, can't help you.
That's okay. I guess it was just opening it out as something. I'm wondering whether that is something that people are confronting and that's affecting the sorts of practices that can be.
I think we don't tell very good stories about libraries and archives in the public life. So I'll give you an example. The place that I worked in, the program I had, CSDH, had a beautiful librarian, and the whole institution, everybody loved the library. So one very interesting scholar died, Tejas Vaidyanathan. He was in Bangalore, his wife, a very frugal family. He had one of the best collections, and one of the things that the wife wanted was a keeper, some keeper of the collection, because she didn't want to let it go, because it was not in her wherewithal to maintain it. So we asked our librarian, and he was very excited. We went there and we met and we saw a collection. It was a whimsical collection of amazing books collected over a span of 50, 60 years of a mind that was he was this early psychoanalyst, was trying to find a different idiom of psychoanalysis in India. So I always tell people that you go there and you will find this collection, and in this collection you may find an entry point into some queries that you have. But I think a lot of the time libraries are become they're kind of narrated as passive repositories. And my idea is that the library, as my encounter with library, is that it's an extremely active repository. There is a lot of internal interesting stories and collection feuds that are happening there. So, and especially in India, it is So, and whenever we have went, we have find it, British Library is a fascinating space because you find how knowledge is contained, systematized, and also the excess that produced. So in a sense, we are not, I think it would be nice to tell some fabulously nice stories. Like I teach in art school, and I would like to tell them very nice stories about libraries as part of artistic practice. Like to get amazed by archive and a library is very much being in the world. It is as important as being amazed by an ocean or a mountain, you know. So that practice one has to bring in. I think we are a bit impoverished on that ground. So it becomes a very lonely kind of journey of people.
Thank you. We are almost out of time, but maybe I'll just pick one more, just going in the sequence, because I think this sort of gets to this question of, Jeebesh talked about how, Jeebesh's work is an example, and Deirdre's work as overseeing spaces across all these various institutions, across libraries, archives, and museums, and Jeebesh as an artist has engaged. Ranajai's question is, for me, an intriguing one, because he talks about a book that he encountered that he had access to, but was not allowed to create copies of. And so then went on to create many photographs of each page, and now you have this new object that you have created. And in a way, part of my thinking about the idea of these spaces, I don't know if Deirdre and Jeebesh, you want to comment, because here is now an example of an object that seems to move between the ideas of what a library is, of what an archive is, or a museum is, in terms of what has now been created. I know maybe that's not the question that maybe Ranajai is asking, but I'm just be wondering if Jeebesh or Deirdre, you want to respond to how would this new 500-page copy of a very hard to access book be classified in relation to the library or the archive or any kind of local history?
I think the librarian did, but I have this friend who is to edit this Faridabad Mazdu Samachar, who passed away, who was a very, very, very erudite man and a fantastic guy. He this was the time before photocopy, before he had to read through Capital, Rosa Luxemburg's Capital. So he was in his early 20s, he was reading. So I have a handwritten copy of the book, Accumulation of Capital by Rosa, of his, which he wrote in the library, handwritten the whole book so that he could read later on. So I have that copy with me, and I don't know what to do with that copy because it's an extreme valuable treasure, but I don't have anybody in my mind who would understand even the value of that copy. So as of now, I'm sure I will find, maybe through this kind of discussions, I will find the person or the place. It is not a person, it's a place. I'm a good person to keep that copy, but it's the place that's the main thing. But that question, that this objects, things do come up as objects which we call that object that has the parenthesis object, the object that has not yet been ledgered. We call it unledgered. Or, and then what do you do with that is the enigma. Is that's the enigma of thinking, or maybe in some cases aporia of thought itself. What do you do with that? So I think that's whoever has any kind of such object, hold on to it, because it is really seeping into your thinking. It is the most fertile deltaic subterranean tributary.
Thank you, Jeebesh. Thank you so much to all of you. Deirdre, thanks so much for being here. I would like to repeat your call to action in a way from your talk, which is that these are institutions that can hopefully speak to each other, work with each other, which is very much needed at this point. And I think you raised two key aspects of authenticity and democracy. And I think both are good, large, messy spaces to engage with. So thanks for highlighting that. Thanks, Jeebesh, for extraordinary work that you do across these spaces. We're going to, can I just ask the audience to just join me in offering a virtual thank you to our speakers, and we will take a short break, and if you'd like, please, we hope you stick around for a second set of speakers. We're just very, very delighted to have Arnika and Geoff, and we look forward to hearing from them in just over 10 minutes from now. So thank you so much. We'll stick around here. Thank you.
Okay, we'll stick around. Thank you, Venkat. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Deirdre. It was a great fun.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Bye.
folks.
Bye-bye.
Computer meltdown. I'm back.
It was great
Hi, Ken.
fun.
Welcome back. Ken, we didn't really get a chance to go through all the questions. Maybe we'll, yeah, if Jeebesh is still around, if you have the time, Jeebesh, you could try and respond to some of the questions in the chat.
Which is the question you want me to respond?
There's a question from, I think, Sangamitra, which might be directed, better directed to you. You could
Which
respond
one?
in the chat, or you could respond now, whichever works.
Which is the question? Can you read, Venkat? I can.
Yeah, I can read it. The question is, archivists are trained to look for connections within collections, and their question is there a way to bring out that complexity of the collections through engaging art? So you could probably just put it into the chat later. Or
yeah, because that is one of the things I learned from the archivist. The intuition of a collection. They see a collection and then intuit a possibility of a series or another series somewhere else. So that ability of the archivist, that's why archivists are so precious in there's a kind of a lateral intelligence. They're not a tunnel intelligence. And that's why I really like archivists. They're very lateral, and their intuition of the material is incredible. So my most good conversations, or many good conversations, are with archivists. The reason is you just because they can narrate a material in a way that an artist or a historian or someone else can't narrate, because they narrate with kind of all the edges opened up. They're kind of not fearful of uncontainment, and that's the beauty. But to take it into art to bring it into art practice is a very, very difficult thing, because art practice has a tendency to instrumentalize archives. So without that instrumentalizing, to actually enjoy the internal complexity and the kind of unfurled edges is something that our art discussion or art thinking or art what you will call kind of conversations yet not able to fully draw from or draw into. So in that sense, they're very different worlds. And archivist likes artists, but that conversation in terms of post material, or not just this material, that material, but how they look at the material, as sometimes don't fully take place. So it is something that I look forward to. This is something new generation of artists are more tuned to. Actually, I must say, last 5-6 years, the artists I meet, the younger artists, are more tuned to that conversation. They're tuned to conversation. They don't settle in their own inner life. So they are more conversational. And I agree. It's something that I will take to my classroom.
Thanks so much. All right, I'm going to step away for a bit. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Is
Okay, we'll get started in a minute or so. Arnika, just before we do, I just wanted to check, did you have any visuals that we need to test, or would you be speaking? Just wanted to check anything that we need to check at your end.
I have a PPT.
You do? Okay, fine.
Should
Does it have any audio or video?
No.
Okay, fine. Then it's fine. Okay.
Hi, Venkat,
Yeah, Ken.
and everybody. I'm still here, but my computer is dead, so I can hear you. I'm using my phone. I'm going off to get some help, and I hope to be back shortly, but we're in very safe hands, so I'll leave it at that and pick up later.
No problem. Hope things get better soon. Take care. Thanks. Okay. All right. I think we will get started. Thanks everyone for joining. If you've just joined, welcome and thanks for being here. My name is Venkat. I'm part of the team of the Milli Archives Foundation, which is a nonprofit network for nurturing, building, and sustaining archives across India. And I'll just speak on behalf of my collaborator Ken, who's based at the Medical Museum in Copenhagen. And for the last almost year, we've been in touch discussing, what is a library or an archive or a museum anyway. It's a perfect segue to introduce our next speaker, who I'm so delighted to introduce to you, because Arnika is the one who put us in touch in the first place. Arnika is the director of the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore in South India. She has had a variety of different roles that she's played that I've had the privilege of knowing. She, of course, has a PhD from JNU and has taught at universities across the country, and also has deep work in curatorial practice, research, and institutional development. So really looking forward to Arnika's perspective. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Venkat. And I'm going to share my screen, which I hope works.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So, you want to switch to slideshow, maybe?
Oh, I am on slideshow at my end.
It's weird. Oh, you might be sharing a particular window, not the whole screen.
Let me try again. Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation to begin with. And before diving into what we do here at MAP, I just wanted to connect a little bit to the earlier conversation, because I think something we had not touched upon yet much is also the question of access. And I think one of my experiences in working in an archive in Delhi, in the National Archives, during my PhD research, and I'm not sure if that is because I'm a foreigner, but I had to bring a certificate that my PhD supervisor had to sign, that basically stated that I have a good moral character. And while sitting, and that allowed me access to the National Archives, and while doing research there, I always thought it was quite funny that I had to bring the certificate in order to read letters of people of perhaps lesser good characters. But it was incredibly difficult to gain access to the archives. And then once you're in, and once you have the material gathered that you want to look at, you're not allowed to take copies. So you're sitting all day and you're making these handwritten copies of letters that had been typed out earlier by an archivist. So these different layers of accessing material, I think, is something that troubled me throughout my studies in many ways. And maybe that's why I decided to work in a museum that has huge interest and to engage with its audiences. And I think in the next 10, 15 minutes, I want to talk you a little bit through how we are doing that. So yeah, the Museum of Art and Photography is in the center of Bangalore. It's opposite the Science Museum. There's the Government Museum, which is under conservation at the moment. And there's also a public library within this park. It's an interesting neighborhood in a way. And while I was listening to the earlier speakers, I was also thinking that oftentimes, perhaps in India, perhaps elsewhere, people utilize these spaces differently than how they are meant to be used. So if you walk into the library not far from here, you will see a lot of people in the library, but perhaps using it differently, not using the books at all that the library has on offer. Perhaps they are not updated, not great books, but the space is quite utilized. And we've observed that with a lot of the museums across India as well, that young art students come to make sketches, but perhaps have lesser interest in the specific display. Now, with all this knowledge, we were often thinking about how can we do this differently at MAP. However, and my head of collections is also in this meeting today, so can't navigate away from what our core task, of course, is, which is looking after, there's Mandara, hi, which is looking after the objects that are in our care. We have about 150,000 objects at this point, and a large part of it is digitized, about 35,000 objects. And this collection is extremely diverse. So we have textiles, we have modern and contemporary art, we also have photographs, we have living traditions and popular culture. And our interest as a museum is to tell stories across these different mediums. We were supposed to open during the pandemic, which of course didn't happen because of construction issues and so on. And we then decided, while we had to wait before construction could pick up again, to launch online. And I think what that actually did to us as a group of people working in this museum was that we were thinking about our audiences, and we were trying to relate to them and figuring out what would interest them, what is it that a museum can give to people at a time of the pandemic as well. How can we bring material across to them using the screen and so on. And I think that has informed in many ways the way how we work as a museum. What you see in front of you is MAP. It looks much bigger than it is here. It's a relatively small museum. It's about 4,100 square meters, which is relatively small. Also because it houses a little bit of storage. It has a conservation lab. Our offices are here. It has an auditorium, research center, and so on. And that's also where I want to start, because I wanted to undo a little bit this idea of glam. And I think at least in our case, but I also see many other institutions doing that. We are often also performing one another's role. And I think at MAP, we try to engage with that productively. I think a lot of our visitors experience us as a gallery. They come for our exhibitions quite often. Then researchers access us perhaps as an archive. We have a small visual storage, which you may know from other museums as well. We organize object viewings if people are interested. And if Mandara feels generous, she also allows people to see the storage areas and so on. And I think students and artists often treat us as a library. They come to access material, they come to access our library and our books. And I think most critical for us is how the general public and visitors use us, because I think for them it is a place they come to experience something. They don't necessarily come to see art, but they use us perhaps as a platform, either to meet, to go on dates, to get to know one another, to have a meal, to spend time, to take selfies, to do reels and things like that. And therefore, maybe the question is not so much of what is a museum in 2026, but more the question of what responsibilities does a museum carry. And I think even Jeebesh talked about this a little bit earlier. Also, given the curriculum in schools in India, or given political debate in India, museums have an increasingly important role in order to kind of like guide public dialogue and create spaces for people to exchange. You also see a photo of our library here, and of course it is also conservation and care for the objects. So that is something that we see as our responsibilities as an institution. As I told you, the space is relatively small, but it's often also that that museum audiences in India feel easily intimidated by museums. So they're often perceived as elite, opaque, and technically spaces they don't belong to. So for us, one of the challenges was also not having too many museums in the city of Bangalore, of how to make a museum more welcoming and how to tell narratives through the collection, through art objects that are easy to access, relatable in many ways, but also without flattening the complexities around these objects. The location matters. I think the location being in India and building a museum here in this time matters a lot, and we take that as our responsibility. We think a lot about the context of objects, and having the context guide us in narrating stories. I want to give you two examples because I think a lot of the challenges that we face when we look at research, for example, is that similar objects like we have in our collection are kept in big museums in the West. You see kalamkaris here, for example, textile pieces, and the V&A in London would be a museum that has similar pieces. But a lot of the scholarship that was undertaken in the West always looked at India and, for example, Sri Lanka as part of the same archipelago. And therefore, research was conducted as if they were the same. So now we did an exhibition a couple of years ago that really looked at the trade histories between Sri Lanka and India, something that has been lesser researched and lesser talked about in museums, and really wanting to carve out the differences. So we try to work with the material that you perhaps also find in other museums, but narrating different histories around it. What you can see on the right side are a couple of mica paintings. Mica is a material. And they are usually classified as a kind of subcategory to miniature paintings, and they become like a footnote to miniature paintings in research. But we kind of elevated them to the main star of an exhibition, but talked also not just about the different centers where they were produced or the different styles that you can find in them, but talking about the labor histories around mica and cast as well. So trying to find histories that also resonate with our audiences here more. Talking about our audiences, we also are a museum, and this is not because we planned to be, but it kind of like happened accidentally, that we have an incredibly young audience. It may be because of our standpoint here in Bangalore, close to an area where a lot of people go, like young people go to bars or to hang out or to shop. But it also has informed quite a bit of how we do exhibitions. So, for example, what we can't really do here, what has flopped in the past, is if we show artworks of a great artist and we just put up these exhibitions with these artworks, and it is us saying, this is great art and therefore you should enjoy it. I feel we have to do a lot of work to get people interested and to make what we show them worth their time. I think that also has to do a lot with younger generations who come to the museum, not in the sense of like, oh, I want to learn something today or I want to look at great art, but who come to the museum with the question of, okay, and what does it have to do with me and what am I getting out of it? And I think this has completely changed how we make exhibitions. We often make our processes visible. So, for example, we ask our conservation team to lead walkthroughs. So we're doing a lot of things that border more on skill building, because that is something that interests people here a lot. Getting to know about what people do in a museum is something that interests people. And we also kind of like try to early on bring in other people into the conversation and learn from people outside the museum what they would find interesting in an exhibition. We also do a lot to foster participation. So our focus is more on workshops, let's say, than on talks, for example. And we create moments where we really also hand over the museum to other people. We have an initiative called the Self-Led Initiative, in which people can write to us and tell us how they would like to use the museum. And we open up our doors. We offer our infrastructure or our knowledge and some funding so that people can do in the museum what they would like to do. One of the examples for that is a queer tango event that we had in the museum. So we're trying to kind of like be extremely open as a museum. And at the same time, I think the challenge here is to not have research suffer. Again, our galleries are small, so it never ends with the exhibition. There's a lot that we build around exhibitions. These could be publications. Sometimes they are films. It's a lot of youth engagement that exists around these exhibitions. And it's also technology. So different ways of using the exhibition narrative and giving people a multi-layered entry point into the thematic of the exhibition. And for us, I think what we started with when we use technology in the museum, and we were really a museum that tries to think technology first, are the many ways of how people can use technology to engage with material. I think it always started off in a very playful way. I think we did a couple of gimmicky things that were not that great. Some were more of a spectacle and so on. And we're trying to now approach this a little bit differently. And we have these kind of parameters that decide whether we're going to ahead and do like a tech engagement for a specific exhibition, for example, but we try to have them interactive and educational. We are exploring ways of preservation through technology and documentary, of course, and they are guided by to be distributive and story-led. And I think where technology has been at the forefront, of course, is digitization and archiving. As I said, a large part of our archive is available online and can be accessed quite easily. We're exploring technology in order to have the accessibility tools and for visitor engagement, to learn more about our visitors as well. And we've started carefully using AI. This is, I think, where we're at a point where we like to say we push the boundaries, and then I'm always anxious that we're actually crossing the boundaries. But I think it's something that we have to engage with, and where we don't really have a choice. We will see what happens with that. We're also trying to kind of like enable artists to work with technology more. We do that through residencies. We also do that through creating spaces of debate around technology. And what you can see here is an artist from Assam, Mantu Das, with one of his paintings. And we've spent about, I think, 3 or 4 months building a technological experience now where you kind of like can travel through this painting. So not the painting in itself, you do that in a projection, and it has certain motion sensors, and you can listen to the artist narrating you through the painting, which is quite cool and which is going to launch next week. Yeah, but I think we're interested in doing that more. The challenges, I suppose, are always the same. Recently I heard another museum director saying, I want technology that works. I don't want to go through the galleries and then awkwardly kind of like pushing buttons and hoping that something will start. Of course, that's always an issue. I keep thinking it's strange that you have technology experiences, but you still need a person to guide you through it. So you have to have a lot of like resources and people who are guiding you through using this, which I don't know why that is still a thing. Yeah, and then I think there's an absence of frameworks, and I think technology developers, technologists, and so on are often quite happy to do certain things with technology and art, where we, as museum people, as art historians, archivists, are saying, no, 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 don't touch the integrity of the artwork. You can't do these kind of things. So there's this push and pull between different people involved in technology, and we are figuring that out. So these are the many, many different things that we do here. And I think a lot of this is coming through the way how we have been approaching this museum, of thinking about audiences first and thinking about what audiences need. I think what is interesting for MAP at the moment is to kind of like think about how the museum can also become a place of organizing. So that, you know, an artwork perhaps allows you to understand the person who's standing next to you, perhaps viewing the same artwork a little bit better, and build a relationship of sorts. A lot of programming evolves around that as well. But my question, I think, at this point is, how are we going to take that to the next level? All right, this is from me. Thank you.
Arnika, thank you. That was such a lovely walk through what you guys have been doing, and I really like how you wrapped up by making a comment about, you know, sort of embracing the complexity. So thanks so much. That was really nice. All right, I think we'll take questions at the end for all of us together. So it's my pleasure and honor to now introduce Geoff to all of you. Geoff has also had so many roles, and he's moved across these institutions. He's currently the Heritage Collections Lead at King's Library and Collections, with a responsibility for fundraising, and of course, working in partnership with a variety of institutions, including the City of London, where he's based. He also served as the head of the archives at King's prior to this, and is also the chair of AIM25, and just an extraordinary effort, a consortium of over 150 cultural organizations within the space of London, making them work and speak to each other. So, Geoff, really looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thanks, Venkat. Well, an apology to begin with. First of all, I have had a month-long chest infection, and so I won't be able to participate in a singing competition anytime soon. So please bear with me. If I have to cough during the presentation, you'll know what's happened. I was going to say, I don't have a formal presentation. I was asked to be provocative today, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm the fourth speaker in this arraignment, and I'd like to just throw a few things out, not truth bombs, they might be provocation, shall we say. But first of all, it's a bit of a stream of consciousness, this, but hopefully there'll be elements in here that people understand and can appreciate. And first of all, I'd just like to say what amazing presentations those were, those 3 presentations, incredible work that's going on all over the world. And I think that's something we need to congratulate ourselves. It's just extraordinary variety, extraordinary capability that people, and professionalism that they're demonstrating. And so that's the first thing I'd like to say. I mean, GLAM as a as a term has been around for around 20 years or 15 years, sometime around then. I tried doing a Google Ngram search for it unsuccessfully. But from my own experience and professional experience, it's about 15 years or so. But in terms of what it represents, partly what it represents, which is an international perspective, which is when we're here internationally, we're among the first group of professionals to internationalize ahead of virtually all others, probably in the 17th and 18th centuries, with cabinets of curiosity and the exchange of letters and so on internationally, transatlantic and across the world. And so we're very used to these sorts of conversations. And in terms of our institutions, our component institutions, there's certainly a blurring of purpose and audiences. Who are we for? What audiences are we seeking to reach out to and engage with and be part of? There's tremendous variety of institutions is perhaps something that maybe the wider public is unaware of. Public, academic, learned libraries, community and charity archives, company archives, government, museums of every shape or form, and as we've heard today, are ones that combine elements of all of them. And of course, archives in particular, I'm an archivist, so I'm speaking from that perspective, can be community-led, they can be ad hoc, they can be transitory, they can be on the street. And so there's a much wider and more amorphous notion of what an archive is than perhaps was the case 40 years ago. And the notion of the book has been disconnected from its physical groundings, perhaps with the mass digitization that we've seen over the last 20 years. It's no longer grounded in paper in quite the same way, or is it? Perhaps we're going back to that. And galleries can hang on every street corner, or people can look at arrays of photographs in Instagram, for example. And museums, while they're being decolonized or collections are being appraised in new ways, perhaps there will be restitution of materials, and the idea of the Universal Museum is perhaps not quite as at the top of people's imaginations as it once was. And there are lots of legal differences between the different institutions, and that's why, as a term, I think it can be quite awkward. And I'll come on to why I think it's not necessarily a helpful term in a minute. Because there are huge differences in professional practice, in training, legal differences relating to IP, the technology and software that we use. We're all engaged with memory of one kind or another and gazing into the future. But we have slightly different paths. And as archivists, and speaking as an archivist, I've always said that archives really about people and not paper. And perhaps it's true of museum professionals as well, and librarians, but especially of archivists, because we are engaged with personal papers of one kind or another, and individuals of one kind or another, and really getting to understand those people's stories and what makes them tick. I've always said that the mark of a good archivist is the ability to make a pot of tea. It's not to understand technology necessarily. Although in the modern world that we need that too. So we're story builders, and above all, more than content, I think in the case of archives, context is king. So it's what Sumner Redstone said, the American businessman. He said content is king. So he was the founder of a media company, but I think it's really about connections, and again that fits into the international context. We're not equal partners within GLAM. Archives are the weakest element. We produce the most unimpressive metrics and statistics compared with the others. We don't have 5 million people coming through our doors. Do 1,000 library visits equal 1 archive visit? So impact is very difficult to gauge, and we've tried many times to create a kind of formula by which we can level out the playing field, but we haven't got there yet. And our relationship with senior management is often slightly different. It depends on the organization. Our purpose and our role, especially in the UK, is very, very diverse. And we've heard already some of those are. Are we education? Are we the education business? Are we in the entertainment business? Are we in the IT business? Are we in the compliance business of ensuring, especially with archives, but also with libraries, ensuring that activities of civil society are being carried out in the right way? Are we involved in health and well-being? So there are many, many, many initiatives, for example, that involve the use of our content in dementia care. An example in the UK would be the Smell Archive, the olfactory smell archive that's at UCL. It's a collection of smells, and those smells are used to help mitigate the effects of dementia in nursing homes. That's one of their projects. And urban regeneration. So archives in particular heavily involved in the UK in the whole agenda around urban regeneration, retraining, upskilling, and business improvement districts, as they're known, which are combinations of local businesses, universities, and others, and especially the cultural space. So public art in this instance assumes a greater role. And in the UK, community engagement have been very important. So that gets us into a little bit about the UK and where we are here. So it's very political. It's often about money. And we've seen over the last 20 years since 2008 that there have been enormous challenges, particularly to our sector, which comes fairly low down in the pecking order when it shouldn't. And one argument is that we are just repositories of memory in a declining economy, in a country that's lost its purpose. And there are no factories and only museums. So the National Space Centre isn't a launch site like SpaceX, but it's a visitor attraction. And the National Railway Museum is a lament for a country that invented the railways and can neither build a train nor railway, seemingly. And that brings with it all sorts of political and other emotional impacts. In the UK, we're seeing increasingly a technology overlap. Do archivists, librarians, museum curators need to work more closely with software designers and other kinds of IT professionals and designers? And in terms of funding, we have a spectrum of funding from local authorities which have received tremendous cuts in the UK through to national museums that have a different role, perhaps. And we have showcased national museums. The new London Museum is a case in point. That are combinations, as we've seen in the other presentations, of different elements, archive, a bit of an archive, a bit of a library, a bit of a museum, and have a much more of a public role and a public place in the conversation. In the UK, we have a bit of an uneasy relationship with academia. So many GLAM organisations are allied to higher education and are actually part of them. And I'm part of a university. And there are independent research organisations, yet many aren't. We haven't quite cracked that yet. And in the UK, universal museums are under a question mark as well, as we've heard with decolonisation. Can we afford anymore to have giant comprehensive museums with many, many curators from different backgrounds? I don't know. That's a provocation. But perhaps archives have a new meaning as authenticators in an AI world. And that's something that we all are trying to do here, and I'm sure in many other countries, fellow professionals are doing the same. The idea of an ethical and responsible AI. But libraries have a legacy romance. So people love books, beautiful books showing lovely libraries around the world, and galleries are galleries that everyone loves to visit. There's been a shift from digital to analog, and I've noticed that in the last 5 years. It's quite the opposite of what one would expect. So the two go hand in hand. Digital is very, very important, increasingly born digital materials that we have to curate, for example, and people live in a digital world. But that means that increasingly they're asking for and seeking out non-digital. They're looking for the analog. And we've experienced in our own case that in increasing the amount of material we have digitally available actually leads to a greater increase in in-person visits. So one doesn't lead to the decline of the other. And in the UK, in recent years, we've had a very popular television program called The Repair Shop. And it's a program, slightly less so now, but especially around the pandemic, in which conservators repair things for people, basically. Enormously popular. And people love to make, repair, touch, feel. And digital preservation, in a way, is too difficult. And we haven't cracked that. We've always been cracking. We've been trying to crack it for 20 or 30 years. And people fall back upon things that are familiar to them. Part of that is the physical. And again, that really gets to the heart of what I think our institutions are for. Moving on to the next point, I don't think, in a way, glam doesn't exist. So that's been very provocative. It's a term that people from outside the community don't recognize or understand or know what it is. Is it something to do with fashion, for example? It is perhaps coined from a position of weakness. That's certainly a thing. A weakness in terms of the money that we have available, in terms of our professional recognition, in terms of the wider understanding of what we do. So people coming together out of weakness, in other words. And also, conversely, out of professional pride, but uncertainty. Especially in the digital world, because digital is liberating the content and democratizing access to content. So where does that leave us? Although our understanding of what a gallery, museum, archive, or library is changes between different cultures and different time periods. And the community can be very insular with its mysterious terminology and rituals. It can be exclusionary, but I don't think that's a problem. I've never had a problem with visitors to our archive saying, I want to bring in more ink, pots of ink and oil containers into the archive to spill over your documents. They understand that there's a reason why we have certain rules, the same way in which people have rules in an operating theatre of a cockpit of an aircraft. We couldn't go into the cockpit of an aircraft and run around and play badminton in there across the controls. People understand that, they get it. And really, the next point that I have, it follows from that. The public think they have a stake in glam in a way that they don't with other industries or areas of human activity, road haulage or the manufacture of light bulbs, for example. They feel that they own our institutions in a way that they don't other areas of human activity. And that's reflected in the use of volunteers, for example. And I'm ambivalent about the use of volunteers. On the one hand, I think it's amazing. I want local people to own their museum. I want them to be out there campaigning if there are cuts and that museum is threatened with closure, for example. And people do love and appreciate these institutions. But I don't go to the dentist and go up to the dentist's counter and ask for an appointment. And the dentist receptionist says, well, the dentist is busy, but somebody walked off the street earlier and they're very interested in teeth. So I hope you don't mind if if you can be operated on by this person. They're very enthusiastic. And in the same way, we wouldn't necessarily use volunteers. We can use volunteers for some activities, definitely, but there are many areas that we wouldn't want to use them in. And I think that reflects that ambivalence about our own place in the scheme of things, as it were, and our own professional status. We make too many excuses for ourselves. We're too reticent and apologetic. The funding we go for is very unambitious. It's funding to do the same things that we've always done. Things to do with exhibitions, modest engagement for the most part, not the examples that we've seen today, but in many cases, rather than bigger global issues that we need to be part of and part of that conversation. We need to think less about a small slice of a very small cake and a good slice of a very, very big cake of funding. The other point is that for GLAM is that we're a poor cousin in the world of the broader cultural and creative industries. And that term has arisen, or the creative industries, and there's a variety of combinations and formulations of those words. Does GLAM sit within the cultural and creative industries, the cultural and creative sector, or not? If it does, it is a very poor cousin compared with music, computer games, film, and so on. And in terms of funding and recognition and everything else, is it all the stuff that fits into a different category? So potentially I'm saying that the use of this terminology is a sign of weakness, but conversely, one might argue that it is actually a sign of confidence, that we don't necessarily have to explain ourselves. And most professions don't. Most professions have their own rituals, they have their own terminology, they have their own qualifications. No one attends a brain surgery conference and expects the brain surgeons to necessarily explain their work for lay people. The difference is, I suppose, again, as I've already said, the public feel they own GLAM and they're part of GLAM in a way that isn't true of other professions. So one way it does matter, and I think this whole world of AI, I'm going to talk about that very briefly. There is something called SLOP, which you may or may not be familiar with the term, which is the production of AI, generative AI videos for the most part, to appeal emotionally to people. One category of those online on TikTok and YouTube and so on are recreations of ancient worlds and other civilizations, historical places that contain stuff or representations of the sort of stuff that we look after. They're pervasive, deeply inaccurate, and so they flood the market. And so how do we respond to this challenge? I mean, one theory that's going out there, which apparently millions of people follow and millions of people are sympathetic to, or so we can gather from the statistics, is the phantom time hypothesis, if anyone's come across this. And this is the idea that we're not living in 2026, we're living in 1726. And so we can expect Gulliver's Travels to be published later this year. So the idea is that 300 years of our history, certainly of Western world, was made up. It was made up for political reasons, either after the death of Christ and before the Council of Nicaea in 325, or later on in the millennium. And seriously, there are many people who believe this kind of thing. And so increasingly in the UK, we're looking to archives and archivists in particular, and I can only speak for our bit of the profession, to perhaps resume the elevated status that they occupied in medieval societies. One would have hoped so, as a sort of bardic authority figures that can, at the very least, not present a unified truth, because there isn't necessarily such a thing. There are many truths, or many versions of reality, one should say. Philosophically, one could argue that there is only one truth by definition, but versions of events. We can't necessarily be the arbiters between them, but we can catalogue them, and we can provide some base reality, as it's called, understanding of being able to differentiate between reality and fiction. So looking to the future, it was said that our institutions are friendship building engines in a lonely world. And I think the social, democratic and therapeutic functions are very much to be highlighted. We need to become more international. We were the first internationalists in a way. We need to become more international because the stuff that we preserve and the memories that we preserve are interchangeable and global and local, hyper-local as well. And there are many more categories of professionals that we need to invite into the tent. And again, we've heard about, we've had the presentation about the involvement of art and artists, but there are many, many other categories of people: archaeologists, digital humanists, media experts, people of all walks of life, makers of one kind or another, that can be invited into the tent. And we already do, and that needs to be perhaps more formally recognized. Increasingly, we're finding our institutions are more inside out. So we're moving out into the street, we're moving into 3D and public spaces. And I've recently completed a project to digitize in great detail, hyper detail, London's Guildhall as a space in which is the main civic space in the City of London and goes back to the Middle Ages. A space within which objects can be removed from museums virtually, and art can be removed from galleries virtually and reinstalled in this original space where they would have been. And one could imagine an ambition where whole cityscapes are recreated in great detail virtually to bring our museums and collections out to wider audiences. But I would say don't overstate the digital and the potential of digital. I think physical spaces that we curate are very important. And above all, what we're here to do as I say, is to build friendships and connections between people. And we are friendship engines, and ultimately places of the imagination. So that's me. That's all I have to say for the moment. So I'd say be very careful about the use of glam. It means nothing to the wider world. It means something to us. But perhaps we need to think more expansively and in a slightly bigger way and include other people and think about where we sit professionally and be much prouder of our activities, not among ourselves, but to the wider world. We do a bit of that, but not enough. And that's enough for me.
Yeah, thank you. What can I say? This is, I just wish we were able to also keep a transcript of what you were saying. This was just so provocative as we had requested and so very pertinent. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Thanks to Arnika as well. I have so many questions in my head, which I'm going to try and articulate in a moment. But I do request our audience to, feel free to start adding questions into the comment like we did in the previous session, or if you'd like to speak, to raise your hand, the virtual hand as it were, and we'll get to you in a moment. I do want to come very quickly to two things that both of you said, which I wanted to sort of connect. Arnika, towards the end of your talk, you had talked about sort of looking to the future and talked about the importance of not guarding definitions, and I thought that was just a good lesson to remember. And to sort of the idea of holding complexity, imagination. I'm just quoting what you had said, which I thought was just very nicely said. And Geoff, you sort of alluded to something in that bigger space as well. You talked about a sort of a lack of ambition in a way, in the way we are thinking about not just funding, but about how we need to speak to a larger set of spaces and people. You, of course, use the provocation that glam itself means nothing to anyone except us. And I probably agree, because if you put glam on any AI platform, you're not going to get us. But I wanted to ask, going back to the first session where Deirdre had talked about the libraries and the archives and the museums having to work with each other, maybe here's a provocation. Do they need to work with each other, or are they their own entities? I mean, if it's not an entity, glam, are they just separate entities that just need to not worry about definitions and just do their own thing and engaging in a larger ambitious space? Do they need to speak to each other or think about the overlaps within their spaces at all? Is it something that we have willed into existence and now we have to do something with it?
Do you want to go first, Arnika, or shall I go first?
Yeah, sorry, I realize that I'm running the risk of, again, asking the question of guarding definitions even when I say that, but maybe it sort of ties to each other. Sorry, either one.
I mean, in the case of AIM25, which is the network I run, it includes archives that are part of museums and parts of libraries and so on. So very much they're people who may be professionals from different backgrounds. And in many cases, they're people coming together from a point of weakness, not a point of strength. In other words, they're coming together to say, well, you have the same funding challenges that we do. You have the same challenges in terms of public participation or in terms of getting senior management to understand what on earth we're doing. We're the bit in the basement. People don't understand it. We're not the primary purpose of this institution. That's if it's part of a bigger institution that does something else. And so we come together out of a sense of community to want to help one another, and we do. And that's a multiplier. So we make what might be thought of as a point of weakness into a strength in a way. So there are enormous commonalities between them, but there are great differences as well. I'd never confuse an archivist with a librarian, and we have complementary but very different skills. I say archivists are always about people, and they're about storytelling in a very deep, connected way. That's not to say that the other categories aren't. But we do it in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think a lot of it has to do with the relationship between the object or the document and the people working with it, or the people wanting to gain access to it, and how to negotiate that space, and how are you a human-led museum? Are you an object-led museum? And we have to ask ourselves this question quite early on, and then different departments within the museum would have different ideas about that, and then you need to bring everybody at the same table. And we early on decided on people. Yet at the same time, we know that conservation is at the core of what we are doing in a way. So I think it's a little bit more about how we can learn from each other and see if some aspects of the practice of the other also applies to us. In a way, I think what's interesting also in India is that we can't, as institutions, we often can't hire from a pool of people who have the background in the specific field that we want to engage them in. We just don't have that many archivists, conservationists, and so on to hire from. So often we have to hire professionals from different backgrounds. I think at MAP that has always been a huge gain. We had people who had a background in psychology who made for fantastic curators. Because they understood the people that they have to tell the stories to in a different way. And I think you kind of like what Geoff also said, that you have to use your limitations in your favor in some way and see how you can change the institution that you're working with in some ways, and something interesting and new might come out of it.
I was just say that very senior people, and not just in our institutions, but more widely, are incredibly reverential when they visit. They see a book or something from 300 or 400 years ago. It's as if they're touching the past. They're touching something profoundly precious. So for the most part, I think that they do recognize our role. Whether that translates into the kind of support that we need and the influence we need is another matter, and how we build influence is a whole other question. And that is a question around how we think collectively and what GLAM means.
Thank you. I'm going to just jump to the chat where I see a set of questions from Ronojoy. Ronojoy, if you're able to unmute and speak, please, we'd love to hear from you as well. Okay, if not, I will just read the question out, just for people who are not able to see the chat. Arnika, this one's for you. And if you could elaborate on how participatory practices at the Museum of Art and Photography engage with underrepresented histories at a community level. Do you have any specific learnings from the experience? So yeah, I guess it ties back to the people question that you brought up a moment ago.
Yeah, I think it's so this question is conflating different layers, I think, together. We may not have achieved all of this every time, but we ran projects in the past, for example, the OSH project, which is our shared heritage collaboration between the UK and India. And that was a youth-driven program. So you had people who were below the age of 25 engaging with heritage and histories, and then creating programming at the museum for people below 25. So I think the learning from all of these different projects that we ran in the past is a certain degree of giving up control, which can sometimes feel a little bit challenging or can make us anxious when we have to step back and not consider ourselves as the people who know what other people want, need, and would like to talk about. But giving up on that control has actually created really interesting conversations. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll come back to another one of Ronojoy's questions, but I'd like to call on Meera, if Meera is able to unmute and just ask their question.
Hi. Sure,
Yeah.
yes. This is a question to Geoff as an archivist, but I think I will say that I think this is something MAP manages very well as well. So I'm curious, Arnika, if you have any thoughts as well. So Geoff, you spoke often about the tension between professional praxis and navigating the public's expectation of us as institutions that they own. So I'm curious about your thoughts on how to manage these sometimes competing needs. I work at a community archive that's housed at a public institution. It's the Queer Archive for Memory, Reflection, and Activism here in Bangalore that's housed at the National Law School. And for us, that that this kind of thing is a constant negotiation. So yeah, I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I don't think I think it reflects the variety of our institutions in a way and how they're funded. So obviously, many of our archives, libraries, and museums are publicly funded, and to some extent, the general public will feel that they literally own these organisations. But many aren't. Many are private. It's a very difficult tension, actually. It's one that I leap into, I embrace in a way. I'd rather have the public on side than the public not on side. And it's a question of engaging with them in and not being or broadening access to engagement in a way. There's always the tendency, I think, for the same relatively narrow group of the public to become involved with archives, libraries, and museums and feel that they personally own collections or are involved in some fundamental way with their care and their curation. And so it's broadening at all times the kind of variety of people that we have involved with our collections. I think there are certain tasks. Cataloguing is a case in point, and we've already heard that sometimes an academic or a subject specialist is the best person to be involved in cataloguing. And we've had, for example, a top poet cataloguing a poetry collection because they understood the people involved, they understood the terminology, it was second nature to them. And there are technologies that help us move that forward. So linked open data was all the rage about 10 years ago, and I did a lot of work with it. It's now becoming technically possible to develop these graph-based models as opposed to hierarchies. And part of what a technology like that offers is the ability for technical experts, subject specialists, academics, or lay people who are experts to add their content, their curated content to the kind of terminology that's searchable online. But that all has to be mediated, and it has to be carefully controlled in a way. And we can use technology like AI to help us on that, but it nearly always boils down to subject expertise and understanding of the collections, intimate understanding of the collections. Otherwise, mistakes are made. So there's no short answer to this, except I'd rather embrace it than the opposite.
Yeah, similarly, I think it's actually amazing to have audiences coming to museums with expectations. That I think is actually something that we are really keen on learning more, and it's super important to never underestimate people who are coming to the museum. Often people walk into a gallery and are excited by the material they see, but sometimes there is also repulsion, there's anger, there's confused response to things, and I think it's really amazing to play with that also, to learn more from the audiences, to figure out ways of working together with them. And I think there is a lot of potential. We always tell the team, don't spend too much time in the office. Do spend every day some time in the galleries and just observe, talk to people who are visiting the exhibitions or the programs. You learn more from that than reading something on the internet or trying to draft something out. So this kind of like human interaction and really getting to know each other is super important.
Yeah, we like the public to fall in love with our collections, and that's very much a tactile thing. It's about touching, it's about seeing behind the scenes. Our behind the scenes tours are always fully booked out because people they're intrigued, and people love a mystery. And in many cases, museums, what's behind the scenes and what goes on is a bit of a mystery. And we can help them on that journey, and that's no bad thing. And so in the UK and probably other countries, we have this notion of the behind the scenes areas being made visible to people, in collections that otherwise would be sitting in cardboard boxes being opened up for people to enjoy. And that's all part of that mysterious journey. So we don't want people to know everything about what we do, to retain a sense of mystery as well. It's important. But there's nothing better, I've learned in my experience in many years, visiting, of telling people about visiting places that I've been to, garages, loft spaces, caves, barns, broken down places where I've discovered some great secret. That is something that people are intrigued by because it touches an element of the human experience. And in a small way, we're trying to do that in controlled environments in what we do in archives, libraries, and museums.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your question, Meera, and thanks for your responses, Geoff and Arnika. There are a couple of comments and questions which sort of dance around the question of the analog and the digital. So I thought maybe we can just bring them together for a moment. Nana, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Would you be able to unmute and comment on could you voice your question or should I do it?
Sure. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. So I was struck in both of your presentations on this, like all the difficulties of digitization, because on the one hand, it does, I'm a big fan of like being able to just sit and visit the archives from my apartment. But on the other hand, I've found in the past that there also is a real issue with where then the value is placed and the amount of work that then goes into upkeeping both the physical and the digital version of the same item. I have this horror story in the museum. The university library shall be unnamed, but they actually tossed a bunch of sources because they had been digitized. So they're like, well, we don't need to keep the physical copy because it's online. It was a huge drama around that. But I think that really captures like one of those issues, like what is then the difference between the digital and the physical copy? And how do we, if we see ourselves as stewards of our shared culture, how do we then deal with those differences? Because the digital isn't just digital either. That also requires a continuous upkeep. And I think that's one of the places where maybe like libraries and archives and museums have a lot of things in common, but also work very differently. Maybe because of the value that's placed on text versus the value that's placed on objects might be slightly different. But I was wondering if you could say something about that.
Well, I think, shall I go first or Arnika, do you want to? Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I always think that digitization is a temporary activity for the most part. If we're digitizing and creating digital surrogates of hard copy materials, we should put our energies into preserving the hard copy materials for as long as they'll be around, 500 years, 1,000 years, and then they'll be gone too. But really, it doesn't matter how much digital preservation you do and how many backups you have. We don't know what's coming down the line. We don't know what's happening from 1 week to the next at the moment. So goodness knows what it's going to be like in 10 years' time or 50 years' time or 100 years' time. We just can only do our best. So I tend to see digitization, even high quality digitization, as mainly engaged with short-term and medium-term preservation because we're not damaging the originals, but mainly about access. And so for a university archive, researchers, they really do appreciate all this. They love to come in because they want to really engage in serendipity, and serendipity is much more difficult with digital collections actually compared with spreading things out on a table, but for born digital, of course, that's a different matter. So what we're going to do ultimately with all those digitized recordings of tapes and so forth or emails is a whole other question, and that's something that we've been grappling with for 20 or 30 years. It's not a new thing. But the two need to be, we need to distinguish between the two very much so. So I don't see digitization as being the enemy of what we do. I think it is a very useful way of extending our reach, of extending our audiences as well, very much so. So we're really building whole new audiences of people who have never had anything to do with our sector. We can appeal to the same people, but we always have done, or we can appeal to very different people. And our role is less about introducing people to collections than using collections as a way of mediating friendships and connections between people who wouldn't otherwise have formed friendships and connections. Perhaps people of very different backgrounds. It's a sort of radical interdisciplinarity. How can car makers make better history, and how can historians make better cars? Put people together who are radically different. So in a sense, we can have researchers working through our collections in the archive, but I'd love to have doctors, brain surgeons, satellite manufacturers, whoever, coming, learning new types of methodologies and going away and cracking problems in new ways. And so, and forming friendships, getting married, becoming friends, frenemies, whatever you want, play sport together. We are a way of connecting people in new ways. And we do that through the medium of this extraordinary stuff that we look after and the extraordinary memories that we look after. That's what I think anyway.
I think in an art museum, it's highly unlikely that anything is going to be tossed after being digitized. That danger we don't really have. But we have the same challenge that most art museums around the world have, that at least less than 10% of the collection is on display at a time. There are a lot of also light sensitive objects in our collection. So for us, digitization means that researchers, curators, museum professionals around the world can look into our collection without having to see the actual object. But there were two things that came to my mind, which are a little bit more around the how fast this technology is outdated that we use. So, for example, we use something called photogram is these 3D scans of 3D objects. I think we did one round 3 years ago, and we're already doing the second round right now because the image quality has improved so much with technology over this time. And then you're really wondering, okay, how many times do we have to take these objects out and have them scanned again? And what's the purpose of it? Who's actually looking at these photogrammy video files of these objects? And another one was that we have a manuscript in our collection which has been painted with gold and which had been scanned previously. But because scanning happens with the absence of light, the gold particles were not really visible in the scans. So you end up with something that is slightly yellow or orange. So when we wanted to produce a publication, we had to take all the objects out again and have them photographed because you needed light in order to make the gold sparkle. So all of these different technologies are often either not useful or outdated quite quickly. Yet for us, they are not a threat to the original object ever.
What I've found as well is that our constituent professions need to have a very good grounding in technology, but they need to be able to be mediators in translating what different technology solutions will mean for different partners within projects. So you might have an academic who has no technical knowledge, perhaps no curatorial knowledge, but they do have subject expertise. You have an IT developer who understands all the how to set up a IIIF server, make it work, understands all about cyber security, but has no understanding of what an archive is and doesn't care. And so part of our role is to act as mediators as well and translators, babelfish basically, to translate different concepts between people in teams. It's building that expertise of people, especially in the IT and development field, who can understand what we do is really important. We all have, or many of us have in-house teams, or we have external people that we use who are familiar with our world, and connecting those people together it would be a really very useful thing and would be a very useful outcome of if we do want to do glammy things.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'll just stay around this question of the digital. There's a comment from Jaya, which I think she agrees with you wholeheartedly, Geoff, of course, about that in a quirky way, the access to the digital records have amplified people coming to visit and look at the meet in person and look at the analog. And there's a question going back to Ronajoy's where he was asking whether you might have any particular examples of analog material. And I think this could be also asked of Arnika in thinking about, I don't know whether this duality is useful after a point of the analog and the digital, but maybe the larger question I'd like to then ask is, are the objects the thing that people gravitate around? When we're looking at these as spaces, Arnika, you brought this point up as map as being a platform, and I was just very intrigued by that word. So is the object still the thing that, that's what we do as professionals perhaps, but is that the thing that people are rallying around? Is something that I'd just be curious to hear from both of you. How central is that to the space? Libraries in India, I know at least the ones that are revamping or reshaping have increasingly decided to see themselves as a space that they might have books for decoration, but that's not what the library is for them. It is a public gathering space. So I'm just curious to know how central is the act of care and collection. Sorry, that's a provocation, I know, but I just wanted to ask that.
Arnika, you're perhaps better qualified than I am to answer this.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the kind of object as well. Some of the objects that we have in museums are testimonies of a different time. They tell a story, they give us context around how they emerged. We also right now we have a object on display that you can describe as something that uses very rudimentary technology. It's a mobile shrine, and basically it has a key and you can move it, and then the head starts bobbing. We can't do that at all times. So we have a screen next to it that shows how it's being done and how the heads are bobbing of these Raja Ravivama cutouts. But it depends a little bit. I think when you then look at modern and contemporary art that is analog and that is a sculpture, then sometimes I'm wondering what the digital or technology can really add to it. So yeah, not sure actually how to answer your question.
People love touching things and trying to touch things and seeing things in 3D. And I mean, our DNA collection is one of our prized collections. We've digitized it all. It's the discovery of the DNA double helix. We have photograph 51, which is the pivotal photograph that was used to uncover the double helix. And we have the actual DNA itself, dried DNA. And we have the microscopes, for example. All that is available online. People are intrigued by it. Absolutely, they want to come in and they want to touch and they want to, as far as we allow them to, and to smell the original. Smell is very important. It engages all the senses, really. And I suppose that refers back to, out of the 4 categories in GLAM, archives are perhaps the least understood by people. People in their common lives think of an archive as a place where everything is put or on their computer, for example. And the first thing I do when I disabuse them of that idea, actually archives are about what we don't keep and what we allow to be destroyed. And only a fraction of material from the past has survived and will ever survive in the future. And so it's people understanding that and that contextualization of how things came to be. And that journey is very important, and objects are a key way of doing that because they engage the senses in a variety of ways.
And I think also, like sometimes we decide to show objects despite being damaged, for example, or we have textiles that have been used in worship and rituals that have oil stains on them, where perhaps another museum in another part of the world would say, okay, we can't put this on display. So a lot of these kind of things you don't really see in the digital reproductions. And then when you bring them in the exhibition space and you work with lights, you work with the kind of colors that surround it and so on, and you place maybe an audio piece somewhere, you have the text at a certain distance, you create a little bit of magic, you create a little bit of drama around this object that also brings it to life, which I think is completely differently approached when you're using digital tools to perhaps do the same.
Well, we're kind of facilitators of performance, really, and people love theatre, and they love theatre for a variety of reasons, primarily because they're not alone, and that's it's a very different experience where somebody engages with an archive on their own as opposed to when they're together with other people.
Thank you. Facilitators of performance sounds like a really good moment to try and bring this together. This idea of touch that both Geoff and Arnika that you brought was something that I was just thinking, connects back to what Jeebesh had talked about, the fragility, the intent, the ability to get closer, to be able to engage, and not just literally, but also metaphorically. Was just, Jeff, when you were talking about this idea of wanting, that we need to sort of be able to engage with a wider audience, think more ambitiously about the spaces, I thought was a good call back to Deirdre's call to action of saying, we do need to work with each other in a very uncertain time. And Arnika's point, I thought, was a good sort of summing to say it's useful to just not be limited by the definitions, but to, coming back to this idea of embracing a sense of complexity and allowing for, others to sort of engage with the definitions, as it were. That said, I will want to pick on definitions at some point later, because I think that is an elephant in the room that we do need to ask, when does something become the other at some point, but maybe for another conversation another day. Ken, can I ask you to chime in to see if there are any other closing thoughts or comments that you might have had as well?
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been able to catch glimpses and few words here and there from Arnika and Geoff, both of you talking periodically, I think, about technology as I struggled with my own. So wonderful when it helps us and can occasionally get in the way. But a couple of things that really struck me. One was Geoff's kind of invitation for us to think of ourselves in the friendship industry almost. And I really like that idea of, using our skills to make different types of friendships. And I guess I think I heard at one point, Arnika, you talking about this issue of, are we focused mostly on the things or mostly on the people? And I think probably making it clear that we always have to keep hold of both. And then I have this almost mental image of, using things to make friends. But then to get back to our opening question, is it the same sorts of friendship? And I realize it's both literal and metaphorical. We might be thinking about, do we make different types of friendships by using archives and libraries and museums and galleries? And my final thought is around, I think your word, theatre, Geoff, this aspect of the space and place, which maybe we've spent a little less time talking about, but I think that's so key too, to think about ourselves as real places where people come. Of course, they're virtual places like the activity we're engaged with now. But what happens when you bring people together with friendship in mind, with things in front of you, and maybe different types of formations of friendships through different types of practices, etc. My final thought is a thank you to all our 4 fantastic speakers and to all of the almost 100 people that have joined us during, for me, a very rich, wonderful morning of thought and conversation and images, challenges. My hunch, and I'll then hand back to you, Venkat, is this probably gives us inspiration to think about trying to do this again in some shape or format, maybe finding 4 other people to share their insights with us. But I think we'd all really like to hear from anyone here who's had ideas for another way in which this conversation could be reconvened in a number of months' time. I think Venkat and I will be encouraged to try and think about doing it again, but maybe in a slightly different format, certainly with different speakers. But yeah, thank you to particularly to Venkat and Geoff and to Deirdre and Jeebesh this morning, and to all of you for joining us for a super exciting, interesting conversation. Thanks. Back to you, Venkat.
Yeah. No, just also a quick shout out to our colleagues many hours further east for sticking around this late in the evening or night for them, perhaps. So thanks for doing that. It's just been very gratifying to see folks from different parts of the world join and engage in something that I hope we are able to continue engaging in. But with that, I will just wait to hear from anyone else. But other than that, have a good day wherever you are, or have a good night. And if you'd like to be in touch and just at least figure out ways to talk about this, we'll just put our emails in the chat in case anybody wants to get in touch with us. Thank you again. And Geoff and Arnika, thanks so much. Jeebesh, thank you so much for being here. And Deirdre, of course, had to leave a little earlier. So.
Thank you, Venkat. It was amazing.